Here is what I have for week one. What I essentially did is just copied the crew study and made edits and corrections and tailored it to our study. Um, it took about 15-20 minutes to do. Um, Actually, a little bit longer than that because I had to kind of get into this and introduce everybody to Matthew. But, anyways, this would be our template kind of week to week. So I'm guessing, in the coming weeks, it would only take about 15 minutes to read over what the crew study has for the meat and potatoes of the Bible study and tailor it to our group. So what I'm highlighting here. Before I break this down and show you guys kind of how typically I lead a Bible study or the template or the flow of how I like to do things, yeah, I wanted to address the time it would take to build this study out week by week. Like I said, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, definitely no more than half an hour. When we met at Lainey and Maggie's place, one of the things we chatted about was sharing the load of Bible study across the three of us. So if this is going to be a time commitment every week to build out a Bible study in this format, is that something you guys are willing to do? Um, Let me know. Ideally, I would lead a week, then Josh, then Eli, then me again, and vice versa. Um, my thinking was that I would not, build out the entire 12-week study. So let me know your thoughts on that. I just wanted to front load everything with that and let you guys know what kind of time commitment we're looking at to build this Bible study and use the crew template or diagram. So anyways, with that being said, let me kind of go over and highlight what I do. I just put my personal study notes. This is just some notes on context right up top in the beginning, so they're easy to find if I need to reference something. Or I'll have this pulled up on my phone or computer during Bible study, and if somebody has questions or makes a point, and I want to jot that down, and I have some thoughts on what that individual said, up top is where I kind of keep all that stuff. I have an icebreaker. I always put it as optional because sometimes we're running short on time and we don't get started till 7:45. Or sometimes it's just not the ebb and flow of the group. Sometimes people are chatting and having a good time, and it's weird when you break that up with an icebreaker. So the icebreaker is optional, but I always keep one in there just in case we need one. I like to leave room for announcements before we get started. I think everybody has a lot going on in their lives, so if there's anything cool, like any events or activities, camping trips, skiing trips, any community events people got coming up in their schedules, I like to create a space for group to meet up outside of Monday night and for people that develop friendships and do things together outside of Monday nights. So what I have highlighted here is the time for that. If anybody has anything, they can add that there. Um, okay, this is where I would hop on a pedestal for 5 or so minutes. I'm not sure how clearly it's been communicated to everybody that I would help lead the group. So for this coming Monday, I wanted to take, a minute or two and just kind of say, hey, you guys know who I am. Josh and Eli helped me to lead out. This is what that's going to look like. We're going to study Matthew. It's going to be 13 weeks. This is why we're studying Matthew based on the responses from the spiritual forum. And then lastly, just remind everybody that kind of the culture and the vibe and the essence of Monday Night Group doesn't change just because I'm the leader. We still desire open discussion. We still desire practical application. We still desire people to share their thoughts, perspectives, questions on what we're going over. And I want people to feel encouraged to do so. So I just have a little blurb about, hey, nothing's changed just because I'm leading it. It's still the same Bible study that we all know and well. Next, let's move into script or the prayer time. Typically, in Bible studies I've done in the past, the leader we'll open up the group in prayer before we dive into the word. And then if you scroll down to the very bottom here, when we close in prayer, that's usually when I pick somebody. I found that picking somebody is kind of more streamlined and efficient than asking somebody to pray, because there's always that like awkward silence and awkward break and nobody steps up right away. So instead I usually just pick somebody when we close in prayer. So as far as prayer formatting goes for a Bible study, that's what I like to do. Here would be a good time to do prayer requests too, if we have time for that. If it's like, past 8:30, I probably won't do prayer requests, but if we're clicking along and everything's on time, I will do prayer requests. Okay, so that settles that. We're on prayer. Now we're on context. Yep, we can read this verbatim. I kind of have it somewhat memorized. This is the context where I, or the leader, or I can ask people, hey, who knows the context of Matthew? That might not be a bad idea. I'm totally open to that. But yeah, I just have a little blurb about what we're getting into with Matthew, and I have a note about seeing notes on top. I do intend to share this outline with the whole group so that people can track and see along and see my notes and stuff. So if people want more context, this whole section is more context that supplements this section. So yeah, I'll either ask for context, or again, depending on how long it's taking us to move through this stuff, I might just take 2 minutes and explain the context of where we're at. All right, let's get in. So I have Matthew 1 through 25, which is 2 sections. The first section is the genealogy, and the second section is the birth of Christ. I would really love to at least get through the genealogy, and the birth of Christ is really rich too. But if we're running short on time and this first section takes us forever and we have a bunch of discussion about it, which is good, then I will mix the 18 through 25 verses, which is the birth of Christ. So yeah, I know we recently dove into a lot of genealogy stuff in Genesis, so I just wanted to ask the group for a quick refresher on what a genealogy is, see what they come up with, start that discussion, ask people if they've ever used, this is optional, I kept that in there, not sure if I'm going to do that yet. Or essentially what I'm getting at is, why do people think that having a family lineage and a family tree is important, and why as human beings we are generally interested in this, especially as we get older. I've noticed, at least, yeah, in the circle that I run with, everybody's grandparents seems to be super interested in genealogies. So it's like, why as we age do we care more about our family line as opposed to when we're young? The stuff you'll see highlighted and italicized, that's my personal notes. That's not Dan Trepo stuff. That's not crew stuff. That's my personal stuff that I wanted to drive home. So this highlighted section is Ben Ruby's first blurb of personal notes. And that's this, that Jewish identity came from family lineage. And I really want to draw that out, that the reason why Matthew is making such a big deal about genealogy is because it's an identity question, and that's so contrary to our culture today, where people choose their own identity based on vocation or hobbies or gender or sexual orientation. But yet, if you practice the way of Christ, you're adopted into this ancient Jewish lineage, and that has really impactful meaning and a lot of weight, and I just want to bring that to people's attention. So that is the whole point of this little blurb, is to say, hey, as a Christian, we're adopted into this genealogy, and that is awesome and weighty and is worth some contemplation. All this stuff is Trepo stuff. Feel free to read it through. I think it's really good. He's really good at asking poignant questions to the point. There's some supportive scripture like 2 Samuel, like Genesis 12:3. Not sure if I'll ask people to flip there or just say, hey, remember in Genesis, or tell me what you guys know about King David, and I will then pursue these questions that he has. Some of it can be kind of basic, but I think it's one, can be done quickly, and two, is a good refresher. And a good place to pick up on in Matthew 1, so we're brought up to speed as a group. So that covers kind of the meat and potatoes of the first section. I have some closing thoughts, and I'm hoping that in these questions I can get people to talk about my main point here, without me, people bringing it up organically without me spoon feeding this to them. But nonetheless, my whole kind of point that I want to hammer home with studying the genealogies is that it's meant to elicit hope in the reader. It's meant to show us how Jesus is the greater than person, and how him fulfilling these Old Testament prophecies and promises, especially the promise of the Messiah, gives us high hope and extreme joy. And that is a wonderful thing to contemplate and meditate in our day-to-day life, how we're brought into this royal priesthood, we're brought into this ancient lineage, with Christ being the pinnacle, with Christ being the finisher, with Christ being our Jesus Messiah. And that's really good. That's really good. And, I think this section, the genealogy, ties really good with Genesis, ties in well there, which would be fun. It'll be kind of like a, hey, remember the last long study we did, Genesis? This is how Matthew connects to that. Fun little blurb for people to track with. And next up, again, you'll see that I have time check written here. If we have enough time, we'll go through Jesus' birth. These questions I'm not in love with, but I don't hate either. Tripo's big point is pretty much this, that Mary and Joseph follow God regardless of anyone else's thought, even if it looks shameful. And how is that example strengthening you today? That's kind of this first half, that's his main point, that Mary and Joseph's relationship was controversial, yet in the controversy and in that awkwardness and in that social pressure, they had faith in God. And how does that example of their faith translate to our daily lives? The second one, which me being who I am, meaning more heady and theological and like to think about such things, is talking about Jesus' humanity and divinity. Emmanuel, right? God with us, God coming into the world. That's a big deal, and he touches on that. And I would like to touch on that with the group and just follow these questions verbatim. I think they're great. I think they're good. I think this one is a really fun question. Which of these truths is harder for you to believe, that Jesus is God or Jesus is man, and how come? Being a crew study, this has kind of an apologetic, evangelistic flavor to it, meaning he's getting people to think about that. He's trying to get the group to think about that you can't take you have to take a side with Jesus. You can't sit on the fence. You have to either believe he was the God-man, Messiah, Jesus Christ, or just a crazy person. As you can see like this, he's not just a normal guy, good teacher, but God. And I think that's good to wrestle with. I think that would be good for our group to touch base on, to remind ourselves completely of his humanity and completely of his divinity. This additional thought isn't necessarily a main point, but I thought it was really good. Recently I learned that the name Jesus or Jesus Christ is more of a title than a name, much like the name Yahweh, right? Much like I am, points us to a greater truth of who God is. The name Jesus Christ points us to a greater truth of who God is too, especially his anointed one and what that means. Down below, the very last thing, I added some additional resources for people to view. And one of those things is a podcast from the Bible Project. Of course, you know me, and you know I love the Bible Project on the meaning of Christ's name. I thought that was wonderful, and I spent many years as a Christian being like, yeah, that's what we call our Messiah, but what does it actually mean? Is it his actual name, like John Smith, or is it a title? And learning that it was a title and learning that it was this cool connection of pointing it to a truth about who God is rather than just some person's name, I thought was really profound in it. It was cool. It was cool. Just another reminder of how Jesus is our Savior, is the anointed one, is the Messiah. Lastly, as far as the study goes, we're kind of wrapping up, the Bible study by this point in the night. And there's 2 application questions. We can choose one or the other, or we can do both if we have time. I really like this one. This passage argues that Jesus is human and divine and has come to save his people from their sin. Which part of that do you need to be reminded of? We are getting a lot of voices from our group that people want to improve their day-to-day connection with God. How do we do that? We get reminded of our sin, and we get reminded that Jesus saved us from our sin and that Christ loved us. So I really hope this opens the floor for at least thought, maybe not complete honest discussion, as that could get weird if we're asking people to share, like, what's the deepest sin you're hiding in your heart that's deterring you from God right now. But I hope this provokes at least thought of people, and they recognize the sin in their heart, and they recognize the sweetness of the gospel and how Christ has redeemed them from their sin, and how this genealogy points to that hope and that reality. So yeah, that's kind of the culminating question of the study, and I really want to get to that in the group. So yeah, again, close in prayer. That sums up the study. We can do prayer requests if we need to, and I have some additional resources down at the bottom. These are really easy to find. This only took me like 5 minutes to get all this. All of it is Bible Project stuff. If you guys want to add additional resources, knock yourself out. This is as much mine as it is yours, so feel free to critique and add and edit and ask questions and all that. This is a seminary essay one of my friends did. It was his thesis paper on how Jesus is the greater Moses. I've read some of it, but not all of it, and it has provoked a lot of thought for me, and has been, just a really, really sweet. As a guy who's not a reader, it's been really sweet and stirred up a lot of good things for me. So anyways, that is the study. I will give you guys a link to it. Thanks for listening to my long-winded explanation. Again, open to critiques, open to thoughts, open to suggestions. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks.